All right, let's get back to this question. I'm recording it. This is a question around security. Unlike the previous one you did, this is a discuss question. So you need to pass judgment or evaluate the responses. You just need to outline their responses and talk about them. Now, there's a safe response, which is this first one. And this is a response that just takes security to mean the simple defending from military threats. So if we just left security as a narrow term, we ignore the stuff we've done on theory, you might contend that in order to ensure its sovereignty, Indonesia protects itself from military threats using different types of power. So this is a safe essay, and your body paragraphs are pretty straightforward. So it's got a military threat, a threat of secession, and you would say, what kind of power does it use? Yeah, military power. All right, that's a body paragraph. You talk about West Papuans, you talk about how they challenge territorial integrity of the state. Indonesia responds with deployment of troops. What kind of, would this be unilateral, bilateral, or multilateral? Unilateral. See, you can build up a paragraph by adding more and more things, because there's 2 lines on unilateral responses. All right, second body paragraph. Detachment 88 is a threat. What's
like
the?
To Indonesia or like to others?
You can do either or, because this essay wasn't about foreign policy, so you can just talk about inside the state. So it's a threat to territorial integrity. What kind of power did Indonesia respond with? Yep, mostly military. Unilateral, bilateral, or multilateral? Multilateral, very good. All right.
Multilateral.
These 2 paragraphs are mostly about military power. Then we could have a third body paragraph, which is about a different type of power, diplomatic power. You talk about Lombok Treaty, you talk about peace in ASEAN, you talk about peace in the UN. So this is about diplomatic power. Yes. And that's an essay. 3 body paragraphs. The first 2 about military responses, military power. This one is like your however paragraph. It's like, however, Indonesia also uses different types of power, such as diplomacy. And then you give a couple of examples of diplomacy. They're both aimed at preventing future problems through Asia, etc., etc. So that's an essay structure, which is fine. And if you want to do that one, that's great. But it doesn't try and question what represents security. It just takes security to mean military threats. And that's a good essay. You can still do really well. I'd like us to be able to do something even harder. So what if we look...
Is this being recorded?
Yes. Yes. I'll send out the YouTube link. So that kind of essay wouldn't talk about different theories of security. It probably wouldn't even talk about security itself. It would just say there are threats to security. Here are those threats. Here's how Indonesia responds. A more complex essay would discuss the issue of security. So a harder response would use the essay to discuss different theories of security and then how one state has taken measures to challenge those threats. So it first discusses the idea of security. So my contention, threats to the security of the state can take many forms. So there's many types of threats, and thus states like Indonesia use a range of types of power. And in this kind of essay, your structure would change a little bit. Let's just use one of these. I'm going to do several examples. So you'd spend your first body paragraph discussing security, talking about the kinds of things on this page, about sovereignty, about territorial integrity, about economic security, environmental security. So you'd spend your body paragraph problematizing, it's a big word, but showing the problem of security. It's a complex problem. It's not just about terrorists in Indonesia. There are economic challenges, environmental challenges, there are refugee challenges. And you talk about traditional versus the post-Cold War theories of security. Then you're going to how they've dealt with several threats. So what are some of the threats of security to Indonesia? Okay, environmental security. And what kind of power have they done to deal with that? Right. What's another type of security they've had? Okay, let's say, call that border control brackets. What have they done to, what kind of power have they employed? Let's do both. We can do both. Diplomatic. Political. What's one more threat? Let's do the obvious one, which we really want to cover. Military threats, so secession. Military power. So this structure lets you play out what you've discussed here. Because if you've discussed here that there are many ways of addressing security, here are two different ways most people that aren't often given attention. The fact that the environment can be a threat to your security, border, having too many refugees can be a threat to your security, and in the traditional way, military threats, secession.
Can you discuss the different theories in your introduction?
I think it's better to give it its own paragraph, a short one. So you would mention in your introduction that you are going to look at different versions of security or different ways that security can be conceptualised or discussed or spoken about.
You said talk about pre and post Cold War, which we're not going to mark that because it's not.
No, you can just call it the post-Cold War theory of security without saying that it happened. Of course, it's still happening now. Indonesia.
But you wouldn't talk about pre.
You wouldn't talk about the Soviet Union versus the US. No. You'd say this was a theory that developed in the post-Cold War period. Right now, it's post-Cold War because the Cold War finished in 89, 90. So we're in post-Cold War.
So do you focus on one health and security, type of the security?
And that's why I've got a few options here of how you can lay it out. So this one looks at 3 different threats to its security. An alternative one is to focus on just one. So let's pick one that's, let's go economic security. So all 3 paragraphs are going to be about economic security.
One theory of it.
One theory. Well, yes, because all of these are all suggesting that a post-Cold War theory is a better way to look at it. Because the first one, the simple one, just presumes the traditional view. This way challenges the traditional view.
So you say I'm going to be focusing on the post-Cold War.
Yes, you're saying we can use a post-Cold War theory of security to show that there are actually many threats beyond just secession or military. So in fact, this essay really is an essay about the Cold War theory of security, post-Cold War theory of security, or a new age. It doesn't really matter what you call it, so long as you describe it as being about there being many threats. Can you just hold the question, Melissa? In terms of structuring your essay, you can do the whole essay just on economic security. So, what are some of the things Indonesia has done to maintain economic security? Link it to... Okay, yeah. Diplomacy with Oz. Free trade agreements. And there's a military one they've done as well.
Oh, protecting the assets and black
Yeah.
people.
Protecting mining assets. So if you wanted to just drag out one national interest and make it into a whole essay, you could. It's a little harder because now you need more detail on just one topic. There are other ways to do this. Foreign policy instruments. So you can just dedicate one paragraph per. So how does it use a foreign policy instrument to deal with one of the threats? Okay, so one of the threats are terrorists. So that's a threat. What does it do? Yeah. It uses what? Military power to attachment 88. Because military power, remember, is a...
So like the foreign policy instrument, military power.
Sorry?
So like you go, Indonesians use the foreign policy instrument, military power.
Yes.
Stops secession.
well, to stop terrorism, terrorists challenge their borders. What's another threat to its national interest that it's used a foreign policy instrument to deal with?
All the aid to the refugees.
Has it used aid?
I'm kidding.
We can't line up our...
To ensure their security is safeguarded, they remain to be international.
Okay. So the challenge of being a good member of international community, what instrument has it used? Let's try and use one of the... We've got 4, remember? Military power, diplomacy, trade and aid.
Diplomacy and aid.
Aid yells out at us. It gives aid. Small amounts of financial aid. It gives troops to the UN. It wanted to appear better. It's been on the UN Security Council, etc., etc. Now, the last one, if we want to talk about the foreign policy instrument of trade, what does that most line up with? Which national interest does trade most line up with? Yep. So, in order to achieve economic security, Indonesia uses trade as an instrument, blah, blah, blah. But you're still doing the same thing. You're using these 3 body paragraphs to show that, in fact, there are many threats that a state faces. There are many security challenges. It's not just a military challenge. And that's what you set up in that first body paragraph when you're talking about security. What's that?
I have a few questions. When's it due?
What about to remind him?
Well, he's got more than a mention.
Friday?
No,
No, I only say that because then I've got the week and I give them back on Monday. Because we've got the sack Thursday next week.
So quickly anyway.
I do.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be later though because I don't see you Monday. I only see you Tuesday.
What if we go on Monday?
We'll come up by guarantee.
I also wanted to give you one more after this.
Oh my god.
Oh.
On a different, because we've still got to do idealism, pragmatism tomorrow.
Or we could just take
But then we're doing, we can talk about that, can't we?
But I want to give you the chance of writing really good, complex essays.
Still recovering.
Don't use that excuse.
Yeah, no,